Day 2 of the Superbet Poland Rapid and Blitz saw a bunch of decisive action with new leaders taking over as the world #1 Magnus Carlsen and the Chinese #2 player Wei Yi both had huge days to share the lead after the second day of Rapid. Jumping into the standings, we had 3 more Rapid rounds today, with Magnus Carlsen and Wei Yi surging to the top of the standings, Carlsen scoring 2.5 out of 3 in today's games, and Wei Yi winning all 3 of his rounds today. Meanwhile, the previous leader, Kirill Shevchenko, struggled, only scoring 0.5 out of 3, as he is now tied for 3rd place with Pragnananda. Since this is a hybrid Rapid and Blitz event, the Rapid games all count as double, with 2 points for a win in Rapid and 1 point for a draw. Going into tomorrow, we'll have 3 more rounds of Rapid chess before heading into 2 days of Blitz action over the weekend. Going into today's games, we'll start with round 4, which saw the battle between the leader going into the day, Kirill Shevchenko, against Carlsen playing with black. This one was a pretty solid game that came out of the Queen's Gambit declined. Neither player really made any serious mistakes in this one, as the players eventually did trade off most of the pieces here. The Queens came off for some tactics, and yeah, this one was very, very solid and did eventually end up in a drawn endgame. After bishop e5 here, takes, white traded on e6. We had this bishop versus knight endgame with neither player really able to make any progress. So this one was drawn. However, winning his first game of the day was Wei Yi. Once again, he won all 3 of his games today, allowing him to jump into the shared lead with Magnus. This first one was against Anish Giri, and he was actually in a bit of trouble here as black after white's move h3, looking to open up the king side. But after takes, bishop takes h3, king h8, Giri kind of misplays this one. He plays king to h2 and doesn't quite go for the right plan. What white should have done, according to the engine, was to play bishop to g2, and the possible idea here is to play like bishop f3, for example, king g2, and always get ready to bring a rook to the h-file, where white can definitely pose some pressure. Instead, what ends up happening in the game is Wei Yi just builds up on the king side with queen g8, queen g6, eventually pushes h5, and actually builds up a very, very dangerous attack here. All of his pieces running towards the king side. White does grab this pawn on a4, but it's not super relevant to the position, as now black's attack on the king side is very strong. Here with b4, Giri definitely goes very wrong. Apparently after g4, he would still be a little bit better, according to the computer, with black not being able to break through. White's king here actually being kind of safe on the h-file. But after b4, black's attack does crash through, takes, and now rook to g4. Nice move using the pin on the h-file, and now d4 undermining the bishop on f4, rook a7, bishop to h4, and eventually white does get mated here with f takes g4, e4, now just queen h5. There's just no defense here anymore to the attack on the h-file, and white was indeed mated after f3 and queen h2. Going into the 5th round, the second round of the day, Magnus would then win this game against Norbek Abdusattorov. Here, Magnus was pushing a bit with the move b4, and up until this point, the game was very, very balanced and close to equal, but Magnus does get the advantage here in the endgame. After e3, takes this pawn on h4, takes, and black has sacrificed 1 pawn, but the e-pawn is quite strong here. Nevertheless, after knight e2, it's blockaded. Here, Norbek had to find the very difficult move queen to e4, and apparently that endgame is holding for black. Instead, he plays b5, but now queen to f4, queen e6 is a huge mistake from black, but already white is kind of taking over. But here it gets even worse for black. Magnus finds queen d4 check, and now knight to f4 with a double attack. Black is forced to go e2, but knight takes e2. White picks up the second pawn, and of course Magnus was able to convert this queen endgame with 2 extra pawns. There really wasn't a lot of saving chances for black, as white is able to control all of the checks and slowly make progress. Eventually Magnus got his king in, and Norbek was forced to resign. Moving on to the game between Wei Yi and Vyacheslav Duda. This one was quite sharp. This was an Italian game where Duda plays for this early g5 advance, and now knight h7. But Wei Yi gets his counterplay on the queen side with b4, b5. Here h5, h4 happens. This is always a typical structure for these kinds of positions. And now knight f8, knight heading to g6. And again, this game was very, very sharp, but Duda does end up going wrong here. At this point, he should have just played knight to g6, according to the engines, and going after the h4 pawn, looking for counterplay. Instead, he plays c6 and basically allows white to open up the queen side here. He takes on b5 and then takes a second time, which is definitely not the right way to play the position. Once again, knight takes h4 was the best move. But after takes, knight c6, knight to c4, White's pieces here now start to look very, very good. Black ends up castling kingside, but queen to d2, and it's black that ends up suffering with a lot of weaknesses over on the right side of the board. So king to g7 now, but d4, white is opening up the center. If you take on d4, then there's rook takes h5 in the position, and black's kingside simply collapses. So here black's position is already basically losing. Duda tried f5, but e takes f5, knight to e3, bishop to d5. Really, really nice play here by Wei Yi. If bishop takes d5, white can just take this one back, for example, with the knight, and everything is going for white in this position. The structure of the pieces, white just has a huge, huge advantage. Instead, e takes d4 was played, c takes d4, rook a8, knight 1 c2, and in this position, Duda somewhat surprisingly resigned. Despite the material being equal. However, he was way down on time, 30 seconds to Wei Yi's 10 minutes. The engine's evaluation is about +5 for white, to give you an idea of just how bad this position is. And yeah, actually, once you start looking at it, it's not the most unreasonable resignation. White is starting to take the bishop on e4 and then take the pawn on h5. The b pawn is also hanging for black in this position, so white has all kinds of moves like rook f to b1. And yeah, once the h5 pawn falls here for black, the g4 pawn will fall shortly thereafter. And basically, black has no counterplay and about to lose material. So excellent win there by Wei Yi, his second of the day. Moving on to the next game, also having a good day today was Gukesh. He struggled on the first day, but today he managed to bounce back with a couple of wins. This here is his game against Vincent Keimer, which came from d4 opening, kind of Nimzo style. Here, Vincent goes for rook takes h6, what ends up being a mistake. g4 is played, knight d2, now Gukesh takes and plays queen to a3, and we can see it's a very, very sharp position here, equal material, but black's king is decidedly safer, and white has a lot of weaknesses in the position. So rook h7, queen takes a2, again, this position was super, super sharp. Rook takes f7 here, but now rook h8, both sides looking to attack the enemy king here. Queen a6 check, king to e3, white's king on e3, definitely not safe. And here after c5, apparently knight to b3 here would have kept the game incredibly complicated. The engine says this is about equal. Go figure, but clearly, yeah, both kings are in potential danger here, and yeah, all three results are possible. Instead, Keimer played the move queen to c6, which does allow c takes d4. His idea was to hide the king with king f4, but after a really strong move by Gukesh, rook f8, white's king is basically getting caught, and black is about to infiltrate with queen to e2, and white just doesn't have enough threats in the position. He can throw in a check, but if he gives another check, it's just queen to b7, and black is totally fine here. So takes, king takes g4, queen e2 check, now queen to e4, and yeah, the rook on b1 is lost. White does pick up the knight on d7, but now black is an exchange up and completely winning. Black's king here is totally safe. Black has a bunch of pawns, and yeah, it's just an absolutely losing position for white. There was a nice finish here after d3, queen to b2. Gukesh finds the cute little tactic queen takes f3, which forced resignation because after g takes f3, the follow-up would be rook to c2 check, forcing white to give back the queen, dc, black gets a new queen and wins the game. So this set up a very big matchup in round 6, the third round of the day, between Gukesh White against Magnus. And in this one, Magnus played a very sharp opening, sacrificing a pawn, and they got to this position where black has full compensation. He's still a pawn down, but he has two very, very strong bishops. And here Magnus goes for a very, very strong sacrifice, rook takes e3. Sacrificing the exchange in order to unleash the full power of his bishops here after bishop to c5. Now Gukesh could have defended this one with the move queen to e8 check, forcing king h7, and then knight to f3. White has the e-pawn defended. Here black can take twice on f3, and the position is approximately equal after rook to e1, with best play should be a draw, although still a very, very sharp position. Instead, Gukesh, for some reason, allows Magnus to take on e3 and just starts with the move knight to f3, which is a very serious mistake because now black grabs this pawn. If king to h1, then black has the very nice queen takes f3, winning the game because of the two bishop checkmate. So white was forced to play king to f1. And after bishop takes e3 check, yeah, we have king to f1. Now if bishop takes f3, then white has queen e8 check, queen takes e3. Likely this is what Gukesh was relying on, but bishop to c6, maybe this was overlooked, stopping this check on e8 and a nice in-between move against white's queen. Queen to d1, defending the knight on f3, but now bishop to e4. Magnus came very close to winning this game after queen to d7 here. Queen to g6 would have kept a big advantage here for black, as well as bishop to d3 check. Basically would have given black a decisive edge here, although after king to e1, he has to find this key idea, queen to b6, hitting the b2 pawn, but also threatening the very nasty bishop to d2 check, which actually leads to mate after king takes d2, queen f2 check, and then using the queen and the light squared bishop. So definitely not an easy find. Queen g6 here I think was also quite good for black. Instead, after king to h7, Gukesh is able to get his king out with king to e2, bishop b6, and now rook to e1. And here Gukesh defends very, very accurately here with king to d1, getting his king out of dodge. And the players reach this endgame after rook to e2, bishop to e3. Black still has full compensation for the exchange, but not more than that. b3, another precise move, creating counterplay for white so that he's not just stuck with this pin. And here Magnus realized it was time to force a draw, and he decides to make a repetition with queen f1, queen f3. Objectively, the right decision at this point. Black has no advantage anymore and basically would only risk losing by playing on. So this key game was drawn, giving Magnus a total of 9 points in the tournament. Meanwhile, Wei Yi would win his third game of the day, defeating Shevchenko, the previous day's leader. They had a long game that ended up in this endgame with queen and 2 pawns against 2 rooks. And at this point, Shevchenko was actually kind of holding on to a fortress here. It looks like it should be winning for black, but it's really not that easy after rook 5 e4 and just kind of holding on. Very difficult for black to make progress with the pawns. Instead, what ends up happening is rook e6 check. White kind of breaks the fortress, allowing the king to come in, and now brings this rook up to e5 with check, king to d4, and rook takes b5, trying to take off all the pawns and force a draw. But here, Wei Yi was very accurate. Queen to d2 check. White's king comes up towards a pawn. Queen c1 check. White can pick up the second pawn, but he's going to lose one of the rooks. Now, queen a1, very accurate, not jumping into queen c4 check, rook to b4, which would lose for black, but queen a1, queen b2 check, and queen a2, very precisely spotted, winning the first rook on e6. Now they ended up in this endgame, queen versus rook, which should be a technical win for black if they have proper form. But after king to c4 here, rook to b1, it ended up being actually quite easy for Wei Yi. He finds a very precise queen e5 check. And here Shevchenko actually was forced to resign as he's losing the rook next move. For example, king to b7, there's queen to e4. If king to c8, there's queen to f5 check. If king to d8, for example, then there's queen h8 check. And after king d7, queen h7 picks up the rook on b1. So in view of the losing the rook next move, basically no matter what, Shevchenko resigned this one, and that allowed Wei Yi to catch Magnus in the standings and become a co-leader. Finally, we've got the game between Praggnanandhaa and Vincent Keymer. Pragg, going into tomorrow's rounds, is one of the players tied for third place. And this one was pretty solid. This came out of a Rui Lopez. But at this point, things do go wrong for black after Prague's next move, f4, looking to use the pressure along the e-file. Now, the only move for black, according to the engines, was queen to f5, holding everything together. But Vincent blunders here with the move c6. He has, of course, less than a minute on his clock at this point, so time pressure definitely a big factor in this game. This allows white to now push with f5, and black's queen just runs short of squares on the king side. If queen f6, for example, then knight to e4. That queen is actually trapped, and black is just losing the game. So queen was forced to come up. Vincent plays queen to h5, but now knight to d6. This first knight gets in. Rook to d8, now g4, queen g5, knight d4, the knight comes back. And here black was forced to resign as the queen is actually just getting trapped again on the king side. Queen f4, rook f3, for example, and it's all over. Black has to give up a ton of material. So Keimer did resign this one, giving Pragg his second win of the day and allowing him to sneak in for a tie for third place after the second day. So that takes into tomorrow's day 3. We've got a number of interesting matchups, including Carlsen White against Praggnanandhaa, Wei White against Noterbeck. So it should be a very, very exciting day of Rapid tomorrow. I'll be back here for the recap. Hopefully you folks enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Until then, take care.